With the Shah back on the throne thanks to the CIA, the Iranian monarchy seemed secure. But for the Pahlavi dynasty to continue, the Shah needed a male heir. His second wife, Soraya, was unable to conceive. So in 1958, pressure from the royal court led him to tearfully announce his divorce. But the Shah would not be single for long.
We were sitting and he started to talk to me by saying that he had two wives and unfortunately for different reasons it didn't work. And he asked me whether I would like to become his wife. And of course, immediately without hesitation, I said yes.
21 years old, she was a regal figure, superb.
On December the 20th, 1959, at the age of 21, Farah Diba married the Shah. And this time, the relationship would last.
With patience, he would listen to me because I am a personality. Maybe I got too overexcited about the subject, but he was patient to explain to me, and really a very good relationship.
Thousands in Tehran and throughout Persia rejoiced.
And finally, Farah would provide a son and heir for the Shah. The Shah began a modernization drive as a way of legitimizing his rule. According to some, the influence of Farah and his twin sister Ashraf was vital to forming the Shah's social policies.
He was not a great social thinker. Certainly he liked to be associated with progressive causes. He liked to see himself as a social emancipator. But the ideas were both those of Farah and also of Ashraf.
The changes happened really in 1963. What we call the White Revolution. White Revolution because, fortunately, there was not bloodshed.
Vast areas of the country were owned by a small elite. The White Revolution developed an ambitious plan to redistribute some of this land. Among other changes, the Shah introduced electoral reform.
Before, three groups could not vote. The army people, those who were mentally had problems, and women. So changing of the electoral law so that women could vote and could get elected.
These reforms challenged the power base of the clergy. In response, a conservative cleric, Ruhollah Khomeini, publicly denounced the Shah. The Shah retaliated by exiling him. While the religious right staunchly opposed the Shah's reforms, they proved popular with others.
Certainly there were many in Iran who adored him and admired him, who thought that he was a champion for progress, and particularly women who believed that we shouldn't underestimate the extent to which women owe a great deal to his championing of female emancipation in the country.
But such emancipation didn't extend to others. The Shah kept tight control over the country with the help of his infamous security force, SAVAK. SAVAK was a brutal agency. According to human rights groups, during the Shah's 37-year reign, some 4,500 political opponents were imprisoned and around 1,000 were killed. Countless more were tortured. But the Shah denied any knowledge of such practices.
When did people first tell you that torture was going on in Iran?
In matter of fact, we heard it mostly from the outside. In the inside, they would never come to me and say, well, sir, we have tortured this fellow to make him talk. No, that was not my business, that was not my job.
He had very little understanding of what was going on in SAVAK's jails. He thought that the complaints that he heard about of torture and of executions were much exaggerated. No, I think that the Shah was simply living his own illusions a lot of the time.
But others claimed that the Shah took a close interest in SAVAK's activities. Dr. Abbas Milani was imprisoned by the regime, unhappy with his left-wing views.
What was, for my case, fascinating was how deeply involved he was with security issues and SAVAK issues, because I'd learned very soon from the interrogators that he had been following my case.
Although the machinery of authoritarian rule was in place, the Shah was not a typical autocrat.
You got an impression of a man who was mild, polite, and in fact, a lot of people felt that in terms of being a ruler of a country, he was not too strong and cruel, but too weak.
The Shah was determined to appear a strong ruler. With the Iranian economy booming and development in full swing, in 1967, the Shah crowned himself King of Kings, Emperor of Iran. FARAH was the first woman crowned in Iranian history.
I was crowned as an empress, and I always said that when His Majesty crowned me, I felt like he's crowning all the women of Iran.
His wife's coronation further outraged the conservative clerics. And by the 1970s, although Iran's economy remained buoyant, many Iranians still faced poverty and hardship. It was against this setting that the Shah threw a lavish party to celebrate 2,500 years of monarchy. The event has been reported to have cost over $100 million. Khomeini strongly attacked the Shah for its exorbitant cost and the rampant corruption surrounding the festivities.
The celebrations, which really made people very critical of the monarchy and the regime. So I think, the statements he had been making all these years suddenly began to resonate in Iran because the conditions in the country reflected more accurately what he had been saying all along.
As opposition grew, the regime's repressiveness increased.
The Shah became increasingly autocratic and increasingly intolerant of any form of criticism or dissent. And I can tell you, working as a journalist in Iran at that time, the pressure on the newspapers was much greater.
In 1973, the Shah had been diagnosed with cancer. He was absorbed with the transition of power to his son and considered various liberal ideas. But in 1975, he set up an unpopular one-party system. Yet the Shah's defenders insist that he was committed to eventually broadening Iran's electoral base.
He wanted the country genuinely to become a democracy. Sooner or later, we will have to address the kind of reforms that have to be brought in terms of liberalization in a political sense of society.
The Shah remained confident that his modernization policies would placate his political opponents. Capitalizing on record oil prices, he plowed funds into his development programs, ignoring the pleas of increasingly desperate Western politicians to lower oil prices.
I think the Shah developed a great deal of independence. On the issue of oil, we have letters from Nixon, Ford, beseeching the Shah to bring down the price. The Shah stands his ground very firmly and says, this is my national interest, I'm not going to give up.
But the world economy was to act against the Shah. In 1977, with oil prices plummeting, the Shah's ambitious development plans had to be cut back.
There was a great deal of social dislocation, big economic schemes which were very ambitious, not all of which were working out very well. A large number of people felt really thrown off balance.
They descended onto the streets of Tehran, angered at the lack of political freedom and feeling the Shah was out of touch. For once, the Shah was powerless to stem the growing tide of opposition.
My husband changed many government and many prime ministers, but they couldn't calm down the situation.
By late 1978, Iran was in chaos. The Shah's credibility and authority were virtually non-existent. He knew the end was near, and he made plans for his family to leave the country. On the eve of his mother's departure, he organized a final dinner. Outside the palace, demonstrators were calling for the death of the Shah. Inside, the electricity was flickering on and off.
It was a terrible, sad, moving moment. And then all the time during the dinner, the poor Shah was playing with her, and without anybody's notice, because I know him so much, looking at his mother, thinking to himself. He didn't say a word to me. Is he going to see his mother anymore in these horrible days and these horrible nights?
The Shah makes one of his last appearances in public. January the 16th, 1979, the curtain comes down on 2,500 years of monarchy in Iran when the Shah and his wife flee the country. They left behind a nation in paralysis.
The airport was cold and empty and everything was on strike. And I remember the officers, the pilots, on the feet of my husband begging him not to leave.
But he did leave. Within a fortnight, the Shah's nemesis, Ayatollah Khomeini, returned from exile, heralding a new era for Iran and the West. The Shah's ordeal did not end. He and his wife could not find a permanent refuge, so they headed for the US, where the Shah sought treatment for his worsening cancer. On his arrival, American diplomats in Tehran were taken hostage. So US authorities asked the Shah to leave, hoping to calm the situation. Finally, they arrived in Egypt with the Shah's health rapidly deteriorating.
We'll have ample time after the operation to speak with you gentlemen and ladies.
On July the 27th, 1980, he died, surrounded by his family.
I remember that the doctor who took his ring and gave it to me, which I have till today, and there was a pack of Iran's soil and a prayer of Quran that she gave to me.
In death, the Shah continues to divide opinion, just as he did in life.
The figure that comes to my mind is Othello. Othello, in the end, he says, when you write my history, tell them that I loved much but loved badly. I believe the Shah truly loved Iran. He wanted to make a powerful, modern Iran, but he loved badly. He was convinced that he is the only person who knows what is good for Iran.